Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this week's seminar in the series of webinars by the Grace team on teaching sustainability. I'm very pleased that today we have with us an expert in systems thinking who's going to do a webinar and workshop entitled Teaching Sustainability Through Systems Thinking. And this is the very welcome return of Dr. Colin Sage, who was with us last year, and we're very pleased to see you back again, Colin. I'll just very quick introduction, and then I'll ask Colin to start. So Colin is an independent research scholar and former senior lecturer in geography at the University College Cork and the University of London. He's an affiliated professor at the Faculty of Nutrition and Food Sciences at the University of Porto and a visiting professor at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Pollenzo, where he's been teaching since 2005. He's the author of a book, Environment and Food, the editor of another book, A Research Agenda for Food Systems, and the co-editor of 5 other books. He's also co-founder of the Cork Food Policy Council, and he served as its chair from 2013 to 2019. He now lives in Portugal, from where I think he's going to speak to us tonight. So, Colin, over to you.
Thank you, Mike, very much for the introduction. I appreciate that. And thank you to Daniela for the invitation to be back here again. It's a privilege to always get these second invitations. So my instruction was really to talk a little bit more about the theme that I began in March this year when at the first residential course, when I did open up some discussion around systems thinking. And so we're going to do some work on that today, both practically, but as an introduction, I really want to speak also about the importance of the subtitle, which Mike didn't mention, to the theme, which is connecting planetary and human health. So it's really a sense of trying to, I suppose, build a picture that is really quite ambitious and quite challenging given our current circumstances. This is an ambitious theme, but I don't want us just to launch into a methodological kind of treatment of this topic without taking some time and paying some attention to the wider issues that I think surround us and why a systems thinking approach is so valuable at this time. Because it speaks not only to us addressing some of the challenges that we face, but also calls us to be a bit brave and creative in finding solutions to some of these challenges. And I suppose particularly for those of you whose day-to-day lives are in the classroom, you know, and I always feel a tremendous sense of enormous respect for those of you whose day-to-day work is inside the classroom, working with young people. Then, you know, the question will be, how do we present this material in a way which is accessible, but which encourages those people to become much more engaged in trying to find solutions? And I have to say that requires a different pedagogy in the way that we approach some of these questions. We're not sort of thinking of the teacher so much as a central authority as much as a facilitator to unlock learning in the classroom. And so there's some big challenges there in thinking about both the issues that we face, the ways that we communicate them, and I suppose the motivations that we're trying to draw out from our students in terms of engaging with them. I have to say, as as Mike said, I've been teaching in Polenzo, and I was there last week at the University of Gastronomic Sciences teaching a master's level class, World Food Studies. And I have to say, teaching this material, I found them really not very engaged at all. And I really was working hard last week to try and draw out some interest. And really, I think they would have been better off tasting balsamic vinegar than to actually engage with the issues of climate change, biodiversity breakdown, and all the other things that we're concerned about as sustainability people. Um, and yet, a previous class, people threw themselves at me saying, "We need more of this information. We need more of this." And my style hadn't changed, but sometimes the group chemistry does quite significantly. So we can't always be successful in working through these kind of issues. But anyway, I realize I haven't yet shared my screen, and let me do that straight away. Okay, so um, we can now work through this. So connecting planetary and human health is the backdrop, and that's where I want to begin. Let me start by just giving you an idea of what we plan to do then in the time that we have. Really, I'm going to say a few words which I think speak to developing a critical pedagogy in terms of approaching our concern with sustainability. So, teaching sustainability and learning sustainability are two things that we have to think about in the context of systems thinking. Um, I'm going to say a few words about planetary stewardship because this whole notion of a planet that we're living on, I think, is important. It provides us with a really important backdrop to contextualize the work that we need to do inside the classroom. I'll say a few words, not very much, about the Sustainable Development Goals. You'll be already very familiar with those. Does it help us in thinking about systems or not? Maybe we can explore some of that. Then we'll open up some conceptual tools in relation to systems thinking, and so briefly we'll look through some of those, and then we'll look briefly at methods. We'll finally, as I think as Daniela was advising us, then we'll look at loopy, and so we'll have before we break for coffee in an hour, she will briefly explain what this whole loopy exercise might be about, and I think it's kind of very instructive and very useful, and I think very engaging for students to learn about this. So that's the way that I anticipate our time over the next hour. So let me begin by saying when we talk about sustainability, we have to ask ourselves, are we really teaching about sustainability or are we teaching sustainability? And I mean, I appreciate that most of you are speaking English is a second language, and I'm trying to be as clear in my use of the language as I can be. But that word about, is a very significant difference in the way that we might express our relationship to sustainability. What I would argue is that we're not actually teaching a set of methods or principles that are separate from us. In other words, what we're not trying to do is to, I suppose, objectify sustainability, but in some ways to embody it, to own it, and to exert agency over sustainability. So, in other words, how we go about our lives, the degree to which we aspire to and achieve a degree of sustainability in our lives is important. I mean, I did wonder whether using a metaphor like calcio, football. We can watch football and we're spectators and we watch it played out on the pitch. However, and whether it's Serie A or or the Premiership in the UK, we see football and we understand the principles of football in order for us to enjoy it. It's quite different from being out, even in the street, kicking a ball about with each other. And so that process of engaging with a ball is very different from watching it, especially watching it on TV. So are we spectators in sustainability, or are we agents of sustainability? And that's where I think we wish to, I want to sort of tease out this idea. So this critical approach, I mean, there's been many distinguished scholars. I'm thinking of Paulo Freire. I'm thinking of Fritjof Capra. Gregory Bateson. Many distinguished people have been talking about this whole process of engaging a different kind of pedagogy in order to engage people in a more embodied way than simply thinking about it in an abstract sense. So I suppose what I'm speaking of here is a form of engagement of teaching, if you like, which is relational, which is transdisciplinary, which is multi-perspectival. Don't worry about scribbling down these words. This stuff will be available. Daniela will make a PDF available later anyway, so you'll have the words. But you get the sense in which what I'm speaking about here are ways of embodying some of this stuff and owning it and exercising agency around it. So it wants to be contextual. It wants to be grounded in a context in which we are familiar, or at least have some understanding about. It's modest. It doesn't suffer from hubris. We're not making great claims of what we might achieve. We're trying to be reasonably modest about what we might do, but we're responsible about doing that. We're thinking through a systemic and holistic approach, which I think is very important. The other dimension to this kind of work, I think, thinking about systems, is that it also fosters a certain degree of self-reflection. In other words, what people, the social scientists, talk about, kind of establishing positionality. We can build ourselves into that picture, and we can build others in there as well. It's not an abstract process that's going on beyond ourselves, and in which we've objectified all of that. So if there's a degree to which we see ourselves as being part of this picture, then there are opportunities, I suppose, for personal development, for responsibility, for enhancing our skills. And also, and critically, of course, is to encourage societal critique, as well as, of course, an appreciation of scales. And I'll come back to the question of scales. As Mike said, I'm a geographer by training, and therefore thinking about the different scales of analysis from the global to the local is something that I do all the time. I can't help myself. And so we'll do that a little bit later on. But you may have heard this whole idea of head, heart, and hands, or head, hands, and heart approach. And much of what we do is about engaging the intellect. It's about working with the head, working with our mind, our brains, trying to find ways of motivating students intrinsically through using ideas that appeal to them intellectually. I suppose a hands approach is also important. Most especially, I suppose we think of that in terms of vocational or craft-based skills. So how can we enable people to develop, I suppose, a more engaged, more hands-on approach? Um, I suppose what we're trying to do is to say that often the heart has been missing. And when I speak to heart, I'm thinking about a fairly amorphous idea, not the cardiac system. I'm thinking about how do we find ways in which we build greater empathy around the subject that we're doing. And I think this is now critical. I think if we're really trying to understand what is going on in relation to the global environmental system and its forms of life within it, then we have to build greater empathy in that process. We have to have a greater sense of appreciation of those different forms of life and their intrinsic right to exist independently of what we might have designed for them. I mean, we think about this in relation to livestock, for example. Livestock have somehow become de-animalized. They become units of production, which are ultimately end up on our plate. But this whole process of animal welfare and concern for the life of a creature is something which, I mean, I don't want to make a case here for vegetarianism or anything like that. I'm not doing that. It's about building a greater sense of empathy with the natural world and other forms of life. And so I would say that actually this whole approach about teaching sustainability should be about encouraging teaching sustainability is about encouraging this more integrated head, heart, and hands approach. And I'll say another word in a moment, but in this respect, I suppose the contrast is with what we might describe as a more Cartesian, instrumental view of teaching about the component parts. So often we break down a system into its component parts, and we're drilling into those components and trying to understand how they exist, their identity, and how they work, how they function. It's a clockmaker's kind of approach to the world, seeing how all of these various kinds of parts interrelate, I suppose, or how they exist. But we're working towards trying to better understand a process-driven, co-evolutionary and dynamic and systemic approach. So I'm hoping that this systems thinking approach, this might sound a little abstract, a little bit disconnected at the moment, but what I want to do is to really say systems thinking, and particularly systems mapping exercises, shouldn't just be regarded purely as a kind of methodological object. They should be kind of contextualized, and they bring with it an opportunity to broaden, I suppose, the way that we imagine this work being unfolded in the classroom. So if we talked about teaching sustainability, then what is it about learning sustainability? And that's kind of a process. So it's a two-way process. The teaching and learning is obviously what we're all engaged in some way. And I would argue that learning is a social process. And in some ways, this part of what this network, this systems thinking approach can do is to build opportunities for more collaborative and more cooperative exercises inside the classroom. It can create, I suppose, a sense of conviviality, where people are working together on common issues, trying to resolve the complexity of situations. It's clearly not competitive. And in that respect, I suppose the role of teachers becomes different in this exercise as well. They become much more facilitators, creating the context for learning, not a single point of intellectual authority. You don't hold all the answers, and neither should you be expected to. I mean, I think that's the question. I mean, what we're trying to do here is create a context of a questioning environment. Asking the questions is probably at least, well, if not more important than coming up with the answers, as it were, the solutions. So that's kind of important. Um, I would suggest that this process of learning about learning sustainability is a focus upon problem solving. These aren't abstract issues. We have to begin to focus upon real world situations, and clearly we're dealing with quite complex situations, because if we do that, then actually it gives learners the opportunity to develop skills to navigate the uncertainty that surrounds us. I mean, we're living in a highly volatile, highly uncertain, incredibly dynamic world. Whether it's because of, it, unexpected weather patterns that are unfolding. I mean, this extraordinary cyclone that hit Sri Lanka and Thailand this last week, seemed to be that people weren't sufficiently prepared for that. So we might all feel ourselves vulnerable to these kinds of events. Uncertainty isn't helped by the level of political uncertainty that we face. So it's about connecting up some of these different domains and understanding that actually uncertainty and unpredictability is something that we have to deal with. So it actually suggests that we are not in a position where we can find singular solutions to clearly identifiable problems. So what we're trying to do, I suppose, is create a context where learners are encouraged to create connections across different disciplines, across different sectors, across different concepts. Indeed, the brave teacher is the one that starts to connect with what goes on, not in their classroom, but in other classrooms, taught by other teachers in other disciplines. How can the geographer speak about what's going on in the economics classroom or inside the sociology classroom or and elsewhere inside the school or the college? These kind of things are very important, is crossing over those disciplinary boundaries that often separate us and to find connections. This, of course, presupposes that there are opportunities as well for teachers and professors to talk to each other about what they're doing. So collaboration isn't just about that taking place inside the classroom amongst pupils. It should be, of course, collaboration that takes place in the staff common rooms over coffee, over tea, talking about things that they are doing and how they might, find ways of shaping and sharing their different teaching that might lead to some kind of common outcome. And this again speaks to other forms of connectivity. You can see from what I'm saying, and I'm sure many of you are shaking your heads and saying, this is a man who has never spent time inside school classroom, who doesn't understand the difficulties I face. And, it's all very well being, abstract in this way. And I really acknowledge your reservations about taking this place on, this stuff on. And it does require, I suppose, a sense in which this has to be rolled out in a way in which school management systems understand the opportunities that, disrupting the conventional curriculum really creates opportunities. Isn't just about making more difficulty. It's about creating opportunities for serious sense making. It may not lead to an obvious endpoint with a single correct answer. Now, this may, for many, be a very uneasy kind of process. But I think that's where we have to be heading ultimately, given the nature of the challenges that we face. I hope so far that this is making some sense, because what I'm really trying to do here is to talk about a kind of kinesthetic learning. In other words, a more embodied form of learning, which is about not just learning things intellectually through the head, and not necessarily just through developing sort of vocational skills with the hands, trying to find ways of tying all of this together in some kind of a way. Some colleagues of mine have been at university are now making much more use of walking classrooms. So in other words, the students are coming out of the classroom and they're doing walking tours and engaging in the work as a walking exercise. And those kind of role playing or model building or systems mapping exercises are all part of embodying, I suppose, this process in interesting ways. I'll push on if I can. And just to make it clear that I suppose what I'm speaking about is not just something abstract and that has come out of my kind of overheated brain. This diagram, in fact, comes from the scientific journal, the Lancet Planetary Health Journal, which they've been working on these kind of issues now for some time. And of course, the Lancet was involved in the production of the Eat Lancet report, talking about a planetary diet. So they have been talking about the need for changes in the food system because of the implications of what our current food system does in relation to both planetary health and human health. So that's why I'm particularly interested in trying to tie these things together. But this isn't just about food, as you can see in this diagram. There's a whole set of things about how do we find ways of interconnecting with nature. Clearly, what we speak about the Anthropocene, which is this era that we're in. You will probably know the word. after having passed through, as scientists have told us, the Holocene. We're now in this period, which is, and again, dating it is something around which there's some controversy. But if we're in this geological era called the Anthropocene, what are the implications both for human health and as well as planetary health? And we know that there's a lot of things that have been going on in terms of anthropogenic change going on, so leading to a global agenda. We had the COP30 meeting finish last week in Belém, in Brazil, unsatisfactorily in many ways, uh, which is why I think we have to find ways of connecting up with, more the local socioeconomic and environmental conditions, and finding local learning priorities in those. But again, you see these kinds of skill sets, systems thinking and complexity, working towards greater equity and social justice, thinking about movement building and systems change. These are the Lancet's ideas that we need to work towards. And that's why I think this is an approach that says business as usual, the way that we have conducted ourselves as educationalists or as whatever it might be, scientists in various kinds of avenues of work, are no longer adequate. That we have to build a more systemic way of approaching some of these thinking, some of these topics. So that's, I suppose, what lies behind this whole argument here, is to make the case for this kind of approach. You can have a look at that diagram, as I say, later on. Now, I just wanted to kind of, I suppose, for my own benefit, if you will give me 2 minutes of being a bit self-indulgent, it's just that I suppose, given where I am in terms of my life course, I kind of look back a bit and think, my God, we've been involved in this, talking about this work for quite some time. And, and then the COP30 meeting gives you a sense of, real frustration. How don't we understand that the science has given us these warnings now since 1990? The first IPCC report was published in 1990, telling us that climate change was an issue. And here we are still at 2025 at a meeting in which, fossil fuel producers still seem to be able to rule the roost. But it occurred to me that in the early 1990s, I was involved in an exercise writing a master's level distance learning course in environmental management. And we came up with these, series of principles. They're well established at the time, principles and methods, including, this idea of precaution, of duty of care, of subsidiarity. Many of these ideas were embedded within the European Commission. The European Commission had many of these principles as part of its whole, treaty packages, there's Treaty of Lisbon and others, and so on. And so, these were important, but now we seem to be in this age of what I call polycrisis. Forgive the alliteration here, but the alliteration, we've been through that pandemic. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we had a severe economic crisis, of course, 2008 to 2012. 2020, we had the pandemic, COVID. We've since seen part of Europe invaded by Putin. We've of course got the President of the United States. If you didn't know what POTUS stands for, that's him in the middle there. We've got populist politics. The movement to the right, which is kind of driving a different agenda, anti-immigration and everything else. And yet we still have this, planetary kind of problem. Perturbation means all sorts of changes and uncertainties going on. And I suppose thinking about a set of principles such as those in the first bullet point no longer seem fit for purpose. So we have to kind of move forward. We're living risk society. There was a sociologist, Ulrich Beck, who wrote a book on the risk society, wrote a number of things around the risk society, and the kind of unknowns. And well, of course, when the book was coming out in the 1990s, many of the debates there were about the uncertainties around nuclear power. What were we going to do with nuclear waste? hasn't gone away, that issue, but it's been completely overtaken by other concerns, including these forever chemicals. And I mean, there was another report produced yesterday telling us that forever chemicals are now widely in our breakfast cereals. So these forever chemicals, PFAS, doesn't matter what they are, fluorofluoro chemicals, and microplastics. They're so small, and they're so they're so pervasive. They're invading many of our of our food products and other things that we're ingesting. So finding their way into our body, including, of course, we know find their way into even breast milk being fed to infants. So there's a set of unknowns in there. We're living in this era of uncertainty, of volatility, and unpredictability. And I suppose all of those issues suggest that, you know, going about our work in the way that we once did, with the degree of certainty about cause and effect, linear relationships, and so on, is no longer suitable. That we do have to be, more flexible in the way that we go about it. Place importance upon things like adaptation, building resilience, greater diversification, building system redundancy, building preparedness, and so on. All of these are key kind of factors that we might need to be aware of as we go forward. So in some ways, we're talking about embracing complexity. How are we going to do that? And complexity seems not a suitable topic to bring into the classroom, but I think if we do it in a way that says, listen, we're not necessarily clear about the way going forward. Let's just brainstorm questions. How do we go about finding a way through this process? I think that's important. A willingness to accept ambiguity, uncertainty, recognizing limits to our understanding. There's a whole science about ignorance. Ignorance is something to be embraced, not to be ignored. And I suppose this acronym at the end stands for what we don't know, we don't know. In other words, you will have heard that it's been used in management for a bit. But what we don't know means we're not even asking the right questions. So if we want to ask, if we say, "Well, I want to know something more about, some aspect of plant botany," well, I can go to a plant botany book and find out. More likely, I'll probably go to Google and start from there. God forbid, I could even go to ChatGPT and understand everything I need to know about plant botany. But the issue is, are we asking the right questions about these very unknowns? And that's a question that means we have to create, I think, a more modest way of approaching our learning in that respect. So it's about accepting a duty of planetary stewardship, accepting with humility, rather than, I suppose, performing a managerialism with arrogance, saying we have a solution for climate change. It will involve putting up some kind of cloud of dust into the atmosphere in order to reflect the sun's rays, and that will be it. Or carbon capture and storage will be the solution. Those kind of things may or may not contribute something in the longer term. But in the short run, we all have a responsibility to do something as stewards of our planet. And that's where I'm hoping you will accept that systems thinking may make a contribution, you know. But before we get there, which we're quickly heading for, I just wanted to remind us that the Sustainable Development Goals, that you're all very familiar with, of course, again suggest these kinds of segmented individual goals, such as number two, zero hunger, for example, or health being a separate, education being another issue, gender equality. We know in practice, of course, all of these things are closely interrelated. And so that those 17 development goals actually have 197 whatever it is objectives, and many more sub goals and so on. In that respect, I think this helps us to understand that actually we can't just deal with issues around energy or food systems or education by themselves. That gradually what we have to find ways of doing is see how they begin to kind of interrelate one to another. and that we begin to appreciate that creating these enabling conditions begins to build greater synergy across these issues. Frankly, food systems depend upon huge amounts of energy. Now, if we carry on using fossil fuels for driving our food systems, we're going to maintain a major, major problem here. If we can find ways of using renewables and so on inside food systems and changing the food systems to lower our energy demand and so on, we can begin to find these synergistic relationships helping us to achieve these sustainable development goals, which, as you know, are supposed to be achieved by 2030, and which the Secretary General of the United Nations tells us we are wildly off course. So we've got a lot of work to do in the remaining 5 years, if we have any hope at all of working them. But these system interactions are very important when we think about systems and the ways in which, we might work on one particular system, but these systems are interlocking, and it's important to recognize that process. So this was a diagram which I did use previously in a presentation, and it remains, I think, a very good one, because what it reminds us is that systems is indeed more than the sum of its component parts. That's the really important thing. If you could imagine a thick hawser, one of these big thick ropes used by ships thrown over a capstan, and that enabled the ship to be held by the side of a quayside there. We see those ropes, those big thick hawsers are made up of many different strands. We can take those strands apart, and we can see how those strands, we can allocate them to different sectors, to themes, to scales in this way. It scales we can see from that some of those strands might be more local to global, and you can see yourself there. Remember that the capacity of the system is far greater, is at least twice the sum total of those individual strands. So the system is not just a collection of those strands, it's greater than the sum of the individual elements. And I think that's very important, that systems are not just a sum of the components, that they behave in ways that are very dynamic and deliver a particular set of functions. So in that respect, we are thinking about complex systems as this, rope might represent, that operates across different domains, across different scales, across different themes, and it enables us, I suppose, to develop a more holistic, integrative approach, yet also can be disentangled where it needs to be. So we can separate out those strands and look at them individually, but appreciate they're part of a complex whole. So that's very important. The other thing that we should really appreciate, I suppose, is the identification not just of how the system operates, but also these cascading effects. The systems operate not just on positive loops that are, causative, but they can have feedbacks and other systemic features. So what we begin to build is a more complex appreciation of how systems have negative as well as positive loops that may be operating in different directions. But what we begin to do as we as we develop our systems thinking, it really resists a reductionist approach. It resists a kind of linearity of cause and effect. Simplification in terms of cause and effect gives rise to what I call solutionism, that we can then say, yes, this is our solution to all our problems. It probably isn't. And it can in fact be quite problematic and obstructive if we fasten onto what appears to be an easy solution to what may be a very complex problem that requires careful analysis. This is the only mention I will make, I'm hoping, of food, because I know that this is not a food seminar, and of course food systems are close to my stomach as well as to my heart. But we can see that a system is made up of a system of systems. And so we can't really understand the food system unless we understand the complexity of the biological system. And goodness, there's a number of different elements within the biological system you can imagine, soils and land use and, different forms of life that all contribute to that process of being able to grow food, produce food. The economic system, of course, operates to be able to, incentivize farmers to grow food, to then take it from them and then to process it and so on and retail it. And then, of course, even when food is produced, there's a whole so complex system, social system of demanding food, of how that food diets change and so on in all of that. And you can see all of these are closely interrelating. We also have a political system, a regulatory system at one level, but also, of course, political systems like, can be disruptive, as we've seen in relation to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, thinking of systems, we can pick out any one of these, but we also need to appreciate the wider system of which it may also be a part. And that means establishing boundaries around our system. So boundaries are quite important in part of this exercise. So when we go about a process such as we call systems mapping, it enables us, I suppose, to get a better visualization of connections and systems. So it's a simple, idea of, I suppose, appreciating both these nodal points that we might see as being critical and the way that these might interconnect. And it helps the thinking process in visualizing it in this way. As I've said before, one of the other benefits of systems mapping is also enabling people to see their own role within the system. So it's what we call positionality. It now allows people to see, well, I'm part of this organization. I'm engaged in this kind of activity. I have this responsibility. But also you can have a better understanding of the perspectives that others might share. They may be competitors. They may be, people around which you share very little in common. But if you begin to sort of mapping out this kind of an exercise, you can better appreciate perhaps why someone is taking a different position to your own, and the connections that they have with other influencers. And I don't use that in the social media context. I'm just thinking, what is shaping their attitudes may be influenced by other organizations, and so on. And you better be, through mapping that out, you can better appreciate and understand other perspectives that are different to your own. Um, the other thing about the systems mapping exercise like this as well is that it helps to identify possible points of intervention. So if we could say, well, if we were to intervene here, we could make a big difference both to A and to H, and if we can begin to sort of turn things around, make a difference in how things are operating, whatever's going on here. So again, it's not about just mapping the system, it's about also identifying changes to produce better outcomes, because that's very important. If we are teaching sustainability, if we are learning sustainability, then system change must be part of that exercise. Not just, we're not just identifying what the component parts are, but we're also working for an improvement of the system, some kind of modification that gives us a better outcome. So systems mapping enables us to better reveal relationships with components, gives us a better understanding of how systems are interrelated. And, all these things like energy, water, health, they're often dealt with by different departments of government, different agencies. And yet, really, they are closely interwoven and closely interrelated. And part of our problem often in the realm of governance is when you have different authorities clashing over saying, well, these are my objectives. I have to do this in order to work within my budget. But that conflicts entirely with a different department, which has a different remit, but which is its own objectives are being, constrained by that original department. So you can begin to start to see there has to be closer synergy between these different things. So systems mapping is very helpful. I just want to, I think I've also used this, but I think it's a very useful aid memoir for us. It's called the iceberg model, as you can see. And I suppose often when we are talking about particular events, we're describing symptoms. We're saying, oh, well, this is happening. It could be, heavy rainfall leading to flooding. Oh God, this we've had this particular storm and it's led to these outcomes. We can describe it. But what we don't necessarily do is understand what's going on necessarily. And that leads us to say, well, hang on, what's going on in terms of a pattern of these events? Is there some kind of a trend that's happening that gives rise to over a period of time? Does that give us a better understanding of what's happening so that we might perhaps, if you like, begin to build better, more adaptable ways of responding to these events? But of course, even underlying those patterns of trends are these systemic structures and their drivers. So we might need to then interrogate, how are these different parts interrelated? What influences those patterns? What's driving those patterns? I mean, here we might say, for example, um, you know, there's been a flooding, for example, in a particular place. Well, the pattern is that there's heavier rainfall falling in that area. But can we say something about climate change? Well, if we begin to start to talk about structures and drivers, we can say, yes, the evidence suggests, and the computer models we're using, attribution models, for example, attribution science has really come on at an accelerated pace recently to say we can now speak with certain degree of confidence that climate change is driving these weather-related events in particular regions. So that helps us then to better understand that we have to tackle the root causes of what's going on rather than just deal with the symptoms. Ultimately, of course, underpinning even those system structures are what we might call mental models, the assumptions and the beliefs, the values that are shaping the system itself. And ultimately, we have to begin to start to tackle some of those things. But at least once we begin this process of looking deeper into the depths of the ocean at what underpins this iceberg, what's lying at its root, then we begin to say these are more challenging kind of ways rather than simply saying, oh, well, let's just simply address the superficial symptoms that we can see on the surface. Things are a good deal more complex and more intractable than we might otherwise believe. So very quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, again, you'll be able to get this later on, but I just want to flag, I suppose, a few key concepts in how we go about systems thinking. And really what I suppose we're doing is to say, a system is made up of parts, but those parts are working together for a purpose. So there is a system objective. The system itself is designed to do something, even though those parts, might be difficult to understand. Well, what contribution are they making? But, if they're there, they probably have some kind of a role that we need to understand. So their interconnectedness is very important, both of elements and of actors, depending on what we're looking at. Whether we're looking at natural systems made up of biota, for example, plants and animals or whatever it might be, or whether they're social systems and we're looking at different actors and their interests. Systems are dynamic and evolving. Systems are never static. Systems are continuously changing. So we have to be adaptable in our approach to systems. We have to understand that systems are not fixed. They can evolve as well. And what we might want to do is to help them to evolve in a direction that achieves greater performance in terms of sustainability. So if they're evolving, then we have a hand in shaping that evolution, if you like. And that means that we have a capacity to push them for them to guide them in a positive direction. I mentioned boundaries before. Definitional boundaries are really important in terms of drawing a boundary around what we're doing, what's in and what is not. It's just about it's being clear about what we're not doing as much as what is inside and what is considered part of that exercise. Remember, we're moving from an analysis of the different parts to a synthesis of the whole. That's the purpose of this exercise. One of the other things I should say is this word emergence, which really, the loopy diagram, once you see it, the loopy exercise helps us to appreciate the value of that. It reveals that, you know, as things come together, they take again an emergent property. There's a direction of travel. There's and also a momentum that might gather speed as it moves forward. And Loopy helps us to better understand that. Um, Feedback loops, I've said something about that. Some of them reinforce negative things. Some of them may be more balancing. So creating a sense of equilibrium. That's what we want to do to achieve a better balance. But, you know, perhaps we're engaged in exercises in which it's reinforcing negative problems. We're talking about stakeholders and participatory methods here. So again, how do we identify who are stakeholders in this? You know, we might even want to disaggregate different stakeholders, frontline people who are affected directly by something, as opposed to those that may be more distant and have a more distant stakeholding in the process. And then, of course, it's about identifying points of intervention. It's about saying, you know, where is it that we can intervene to make a difference? And finally, just this last word that I might use, redundancy. Redundancy is a word that you might have heard in the in an English word in relation to being made unemployed. You are made redundant from your job. Well, actually, redundancy in this context is quite a positive term. So redundancy is actually about enabling spare capacity in the system. Most of the most in the last 20, 30 years, our economic system has been engaged in the pursuit of of just in time forms of manufacturing. Toyota, the car manufacturer, was the very forefront of this. Just in time manufacturing is about saying all we need to do, it's not just in case we need something, we will produce something and send it out just at the point at which the consumer wants it. So supermarkets have become really remarkable exercises in the logistics of just in time. So they don't hold huge stocks of food in warehouses anymore. Everything is moving from the point of manufacture to the point of retail on trucks, on lorries, you know, in long distance transportation. Redundancy is so many of these just in time systems have squeezed out redundancy. And so what we find then is because there's so little spare capacity in the system, systems are prone to break down. And so when we have a cyber attack, for example, companies like Marks and Spencer in the UK or the Cooperative Store in the UK were both attacked earlier this year by cyber attacks. They had so little capacity in the system because it was all, you know, streamlined and so on to make more efficient. Their whole system collapsed and they had to rebuild from ground. So building redundancy, building spare capacity is quite an important component as we go forward. Again, these may seem a bit abstract, these ideas, but these are just, you know, systems thinking has a lot of concepts, I suppose, what I'm saying to you. And this exercise is partly about doing that. Now, you may be familiar with this idea, but I just wanted to say thinking at scale is also important. If we're concerned with the planetary scale, as we have been, you know, we're thinking about, you know, climate breakdown, land use change, some of those big questions at a global scale. Of course, it's not just about those natural processes that are under pressure, but the way that those interact with the economics and politics of global trade, for example. At the meso scale, you know, we've got the EU policies, we've got rules, incentives, and so on. We've got national governments. Again, we've got, you know, the imperative of economic growth. How can we grow our economies faster and bigger and better, which gives rise to all sorts of other environmental problems, as we know. But we also have society. We have national characteristics. We have culture. We have a you know, demographic profile, of course, and all of those are features. And then at the micro scale, as it were, where we live and exist and work, this gives us, I think, an opportunity not to say we're insignificant, we're ant-like in relation to the planet, but we actually have an opportunity here for creating opportunities to make a difference, both in the classroom and in our wider networks. Now, here, I should say that whilst this speaks to relationships at different scales, going upwards, as it were, from the micro, that's not to say these lateral level, horizontal connections are not unimportant. They are. They're crucially important. And it may well be that when we start to see, well, is systems mapping on teaching sustainability, what are we doing here? Speaking to others engaged in this work, if not within your school, within neighboring schools, within the area, with others that may have a contribution to make, is critically important. Building a mass of people here at this level is a critically important way. Again, a systems map would really help us to identify who are the possible people that we could collaborate with and work with in this respect. And that would be an interesting exercise in itself. So we're coming to the conclusion here. So all I wanted to do was to say, if we were to do a simple systems map, for example, starting with land system change, you can imagine then thinking about, taking out trees and deforestation. I've got a lot of mobile activity, sorry, going on here. If you were to think a bit about land system change, deforestation processes, what are the implications? Well, you can see has big impacts upon biospheric integrity, loss of biodiversity. You think about turning the Amazon jungle into land for growing soybeans, for example, in Brazil, has huge implications there. And of course, it has implications in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, not only CO2, but the other kinds of biogeochemical flows as well, which we don't need to worry about. Freshwater implications as well. Green water is what's locked up inside vegetation, and blue water is what flows through, for example, the streams and tributaries of the Amazon, as well as the Amazon itself. You can begin to start to draw these kind of lines of connection, understanding how they can amplify, their feedback, which is causing problems. But there's also attenuating systems that could be positive as well if we can begin to map those. You start at one level, and look, this is not to look at for more than 5 seconds. But you can see how complicated you can make it. And there, God knows there are many more deeply complicated. But it begins to enable you to start to construct, adding in more dimensions here and saying, well, it does give us, let's talk about the science of evapotranspiration. How does that interconnect with, terrestrial productivity or precipitation, all these kind of things that may not have been the best one to have chosen. But you can see we can become increasingly complicated in this way. So that's what systems mapping can help us to do. And it's a dynamic exercise. It's a very valuable and dynamic exercise. So what we're going to do is to embark upon that. And I suppose as a help in terms of doing this, because Daniela, I'll pass over to Daniela in just a moment to better explain what we're doing in the great breakout group. But I just wanted to use this template as a way of saying, here we can think about any issue that we wish to introduce here. And we can identify these different dimensions of it to begin with. We can think about the social, the environment, the economy, organizations, agents, and pluralism. So this is the acronym for each of those. So that's by way of a help. And let me just start by saying, if we were then, because I'm just going to quickly do this very, very, very quickly, as a sort of leg up, if you like, to this exercise. If we were to start this exercise by taking again all these arrows, the social, environment, economy, and so on and so forth, and we were to take one topic, and the topic you can imagine I would take is something like beef consumption, right? Beef consumption is an issue. Whether you like your beef or not, nevertheless, it's an issue. But if we were to take out, for example, an issue and just follow it out with respect to what are the implications of higher beef consumption? Well, we need more cattle to be able to produce the meat that we eat. What's the implications of more cattle? Well, first of one of those implications is more methane. This is the gas, the greenhouse gas. It's a short-lived greenhouse gas that comes out of the front end of cattle, mostly, not like their back end, and is a known climate agent. Has an effect on the climate about 96 times more than carbon dioxide. So more cattle, more methane, more climate disruption. Cattle also require water. We can identify water use and pollution that comes from runoff from cattle. We can also talk about depletion of water use. We also know that cattle generate manure. I see the Netherlands government is trying to find ways of selling some of its surplus manure. It has a nitrogen management problem, and it's trying to find ways of selling good Dutch manure to other countries right now. And that's the issue which intensive livestock gives rise to us. Now, we could say that if we were to reduce the numbers of cattle, that would lower the volumes of manure, and that would give rise to lesser amounts of organic matter that can be added to soils. Now, if that was to be the case, so this is our feedback loop operating in reverse, for example, you could say a reduction in organic matter in the soil will require farmers to use more chemical fertilizers. You can see how that has implications for economy. So you can start connecting up, lines with the economy here, because farmers are having to buy more chemical fertilizer as a result of less organic matter. You see what I'm saying here? So such an exercise can take us and just for one more moment, if we wanted to reduce beef consumption, one of the things that's happening is Beyond Beef and those other companies selling these alternative protein products, veggie burgers, which we're no longer allowed to use that term apparently, but veggie burgers and other forms of alternative protein, cellular meat, and so on are being developed here. Again, one could spend time exploring, well, who are involved in here? And this is where you might start to build in a set of, different economic interests or social interests, agents, and so on. They all might have an interest in this. So this is the exercise, or this is sketching out some of the ways that we might approach systems thinking. And what I'll do, I think, is close here and give rise and hand back to Mike, and then he can take it from there. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Colin. That was pretty amazing. And those slides really help to illustrate the complexity, but also practicality, I think, of what you were talking about. I'm just going to hand straight over, I think, Daniela, for you to give us a little introduction to this app called Loopy. Okay?
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, Colin. Once again, a very illuminating webinar, and we're looking forward to your workshop in Trento during the residential course at the end of March. So I'm Daniela, and I'm part of the GRACE team, and I'm talking to you today because we would like to show you how this very simple but powerful tool called Loopy works. And a tool which you will be using in your breakout rooms in a little while. So Loopy is a free web-based tool that was created by Nick Case. And the nice thing is that you can use it in your browser without registering, without downloading anything. So I'm gonna share my screen with you. I've just dropped the link in the chat. So this is the homepage of this tool, and as you can see, it lets you build interactive models, cause and effects models, by using very simply circles and arrows. Just a sec. Okay. So it's perfect for explaining what. Colin mentioned feedback loops or very complex systems, and also very simply to brainstorm ideas. So what you can do with this tool, you can play with simulations, maybe asking questions like what if. You can program your own mind maps, your own models, and you can also edit other people's systems and models. Here you've got 3 examples, and you can also create a model from scratch. So what I will do at the beginning, I will show you very simply a real simulation, a ready-made simulation. So this is a simulation of a very basic ecology system. You can see circles, you can see arrows, and the circles represent factors or concepts, and the arrows represent the relationships between these concepts or factors. You can add text to explain more clearly what the relationship is. In this case, the higher the number of rabbits, the higher the number of foxes. And in this relationship at the bottom, it's the opposite. It's a negative relationship, which means that the higher number of foxes you have, the fewer rabbits you will have. So the nice thing about Loopy is that you can play the simulations, and it is a live simulation. So if I play the simulation, what happens is that two small controls appear, and you can decide to either increase or decrease the value. And here you can decide to change the speed of the simulation. So in this case, I want to have a higher number of rabbits. So, as you can see, this change will immediately have an impact on the other factor, which in turn will have again an impact on the first factor. So, as you watch the simulation, also please notice the arrow that is circling in the system may point upwards or downwards, depending on the influence it has, each factor has on it. And also the size of the circle grows or shrinks accordingly. So for example, if I stop this, I play the simulation again. For example, here you can see that as we said, the higher the number of rabbits, the higher the number of foxes. But here the relationship changes. The higher the number of foxes, the lower the number of rabbits. So that the circle shrinks. Okay. So this is how the tool simply works. I'm gonna show you how to make a model from scratch. So here on the left side of the panel, you have 4 different icons: pencil, text, a hand to move your elements on the canvas, and a rubber to erase. So I'm gonna erase everything because I want to start from scratch. So in order to create your own model, you just draw your circle by sketching it on the canvas, and this circle will change. You can change the color, and you can change also the way you name it. In this case, when Colin mentioned beef consumption, so we're gonna call this factor beef consumption, and then we want a second factor. We're gonna call it greenhouse gases emission, and in order to create the relationship, or to draw the relationship between the two, you can just drag your pencil from one to the other, and you can choose whether you want a positive or a negative kind of relationship between them. As I said, you can use your hand to move the elements on the canvas. If you want a more complex kind of model, you can add other elements. In this case, of course, again, Colin mentioned climate impact, and again, the relationship here, of course, is positive. And this is what you're going to do in your exercise, in your task, in your breakout rooms. you're going to find at least 5 reinforcing factors and at least one balancing factor. In this case, we could call it public awareness. Okay, so again, the relationship is positive, but here in this case, maybe by understanding the connections between those elements, the public people might decide to change their consumption habits. You may also add other elements. They might influence, I don't know, our politicians and create pressure so that they maybe introduce some greener policies. And once you have created your model in your breakout rooms, we would like you to play the simulation and see what happens when you do so and what effects it has on the whole system, on the whole model. Okay, and as you do so, also remember to notice how the circle size changes and also the arrows direction changes. So this is it. Your tutors will help you use the tool in your breakout rooms. They will also show this worksheet. You will be given 5 different topics, possible topics. Your task is to choose one, select one topic, identify the variables, the reinforcing loops, and then add at least one balancing loop. And then we would like you to run the simulation and reflect on what happens, and then report during the plenary. So thank you very much for your attention. And I think we're going to have a very short break, like 10 minutes, maybe a break. And we'll meet together again towards in 6:30. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had as much fun as we did in our group. So we're going to have a plenary session now where each group will present and talk us through their what they were talking about and the loopy simulation. Colin, would you like to call the groups in, or do you want to make some comments? I mean, I can bring them in one by one, and then maybe you can ask some questions.
Yeah, I think probably just go to the groups myself. I think I was in your group 2, and it certainly was interesting. This is a very iterative kind of exercise, you know, experimental and unfolding. And I think that's groups 1 and 3, I'm sure, had the same experiences. And I think that's why there's no obvious final solution to this exercise. So I think the best thing is to let the groups recount what their experiences were, and if there's anything left to say. But I think
Okay.
I think that's the best way of doing it. So thanks.
Okay,
Mike.
good. Thanks, Colin. Well, group 1, would you like to start?
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen so you can see our simulation, and we have a speaker, Olaya, that is going to report our topic.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So our starting point was the use of plastic packaging. Well, and the way we thought about things was that indeed, if it was single-use plastic, it would have more detrimental effects in terms of the plastic waste generated, which then would lead to more water pollution and therefore health issues, those then causing higher healthcare costs for governments. And we thought of circular economy as a model, as a way to reduce and even change the pattern of single-use packaging, but also the importance of policy level at both tackling more incentives in a way for circular economy model, and also to reduce further or banning altogether single-use packaging, for example. Among the realizations was indeed the importance of policy work or existence of policy. But we also consider other factors such as where are we as people or as consumers. So it could be both calling as citizens for more policy action, but also our role as consumers and how we can modify things by changing our behavior. I don't know if I'm forgetting something, but also we thought, that indeed we love the tool for educational purposes, because for students to see the flows and and the direction of the errors and so on, it makes it much more easier to understand, definitely. Anyone in my team, if I forgot something, please mention.
I think you mentioned everything. Thank you very much, Olaya.
Okay, I'll just move on to group 2. Please, Alex, I think you're going to speak. Is that right?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. We looked at energy consumption, and we considered a house, your home. Our group put, as you can see, several bubbles there: money savings, insulation, energy consumption, energy prices, and efficiency of heating. And later we added an external factor of the government policy, where maybe there might be, for example, influence on price of insulation if there was an incentive scheme, for example. And we talked a bit about where money might be saved by adding insulation, therefore reducing the amount of heating necessary. But there was also an interesting discussion around the fact that us humans have a bit of a habit of, when we save money, we then go and spend it on things unnecessarily, maybe. And so that has a feedback also. We linked it also to home value, because in many places, if your house is better insulated, it attracts a better energy rating, and therefore the price or value of it is higher. So we saw that being boosted. And the efficiency of the heating, of course, depending on how you're heating your home. So do you think that sums it up, team? Would you like to add more? Also, Colin added helpfully, we had a question around resilience, and Colin weighed in to highlight that by being maybe independent from the system, by maybe disconnecting from, for example, gas, or having more independence, you can help be more resilient to external effects, external macro changes, maybe.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And group 3, would you like to go off?
Okay, so Augustine is gonna share the slide, and Milena, she's gonna talk us through what we discussed. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. The topic we chose is urban heat. Everybody agreed to tackle this issue. The idea came into your mind because I read a book that was published by the Science Town in Paris, and that I read during the pandemic. and we discussed the main causes of urban heat, motor industry, leisure activity, population growth, electronic devices, erosion of green areas, but we had some doubts about population growth. And we found some main solutions to urban heat, like the first one was green areas. The other one was energy efficiency progress. The next one was public awareness, education, better human planning. And the other one that I wasn't able to add was some local participation and encouraging local participation in greening projects, and of course local participation in organic hydroponic agriculture. And this idea, I was able to study this idea in this scientific publication that involved some people during the pandemic some years ago, a few years ago. And a community in Paris used this hydroponic agriculture to to create a more sustainable society and to gather together and to help older people during the pandemic. That's it. We couldn't add anything else because the time was very short, but we all thought that the tool is, the Lucid tool is extremely performant, is very performant and gives lots of very clear ideas and lots of energy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Colin, would you like to just come back and say something for 2 minutes?
I will. Thank you, Mike. I think those 3 presentations have revealed really interesting kind of exercise in thinking through some of the variables involved and how you relate them to each other. I mean, the positioning of them, of those nodes, the drawing of negative and positive lines, reinforcing and balancing, attenuating, as it were, some of those forces. All of that exercise is a really interesting one. And I think is it as interesting, particularly that third group. I mean, there's a lot going on there. It's fantastic. It's the exercise of collaborating around producing something like this. This is why I think this work is going to be so useful in bringing into your classrooms and thinking about how we might operationalize it. There, as much as I've been really taken by Loopy and the way that it has this very dynamic modeling of forces, I just really wanted to put in one kind of note of caution. One of the things that I suppose software does, it requires people to be operating a laptop in order to be able to construct this. And then people are clustered around a laptop trying to get their, make their contributions. I mean, one of the other things, I mean, compared to Loopy now, it seems this analog arrangement seems a little bit archaic. But on the other hand, there's nothing like putting out a large sheet of paper, giving people crayons, and basically getting them to start mapping things collectively. And certainly that's the way I would hope we might do it in the residential course in March, because we'll, together with Raul Pinto, who's left now, but who was here earlier, we're going to kind of run a little bit of a short workshop around using some of these ideas, and but we'll use an analog approach. But certainly, I think Loopy is another tool in our portfolio of tools that we have. and can certainly be used. But in the classroom, do not be, distracted from the possibility of analog methods in which you can get, groups of 4 or 5 people around a table to collaborate collectively. And, it tends to bring a much more engaged bodily experience of that process than perhaps watching a piece of software doing all that singing and dancing, which it does. But it's been an excellent exercise, and I really appreciate the the opportunity to see that. So thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you, Colin. That was a really great session this evening. So a couple of things left. I'm glad you mentioned the residential session in March, because Elisabetta, I believe you're going to give us a little introduction to something you're planning. Would you like to tell us what you're
Okay. Thank you, Mike. I tried to share my screen. Tell me if you hear me, because before I had some difficulties to make me hear, and
it's all good.
Okay, all good. Okay, I would like to introduce you to the climate solution simulation En-ROADS. En-ROADS is an online system dynamic model that has been built by Climate Interactive together with MIT Sloan School of Management. It has been designed and developed since the mid-1990s at MIT, and it has been used for research and also for some climate negotiations. And in 2019, it was released and online, and it is now available free for the public. It is based on the best available science, and data come from international institutions such as IPCC, IEA, and others. It is constantly updated and compared to other research models. Let's check it out how it works. At the opening, in the upper part of the simulator, we see 2 default graphics. At the beginning, we see what is called the baseline scenario. All the graphics show the situation with business as usual. That is to say, with no before we choose any policy. On the first graph on the left is the energy mix, the global sources of primary energy, in which each color show a different sector of energy production. For example, brown is coal, red is oil, blue is natural gas, green is the renewable energies like solar, wind, and hydro. Then we have bioenergy, and on the top, in light blue, we have nuclear. And so we have the first relationship between the energy mix and the greenhouse gas net emissions. They are increasing a lot in the first half of in this until 2025, and we can see we can change graphics. There are a lot of graphs in En-ROADS. For example, in greenhouse gas emission, we can also explore methane emission from 2000 until 2100. So we have also a scenario for the future. We can explore other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, for example, and then we can also show the impacts, also CO2, of course, net emissions, and we can also explore the impacts like CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and methane concentration, and then the effect on the temperature change. On the left, we see always displayed the temperature, the increase in temperature that we will have at the end of the century related to the pre-industrial level. As we said before, the graphs are many. They are grouped in impacts, greenhouse gas emission, primary energy, final energy consumption, also the sector of agriculture, land, forestry, food production is included, CO2 removals, also natural-based solutions, and then also other ones. We can also display 12 graphs all together if we need. And the En-ROADS, the simulation helps people make connection between policies, processes, sectors, and climate. It's a very powerful tool in system dynamics, and also to organize a discussion about climate warming, global warming, and solution in the classroom. It also allows people to envision a different climate future, because, and let's see how it works in this way. In the bottom part of the simulator, there are the 19 sectors of policies, the solution to the climate crisis that can be selected. They are grouped in energy supply, all the fossil fuel industry, but also renewable, nuclear, the possibility of a new zero carbon energy and carbon price, then transport, building and industry with energy efficiency and electrification, two drivers of the climate change, population and GDP, and then the sector of carbon dioxide removal, natural-based, for example, the protection of soil, wetlands, and so on, also technological one, and then other greenhouse gases like emission from methane from livestock, and also from fertilizer in agriculture with nitrous oxide, and then waste management and leakage that also release methane in the atmosphere. And it's also included the possibility to decrease deforestation. So, for example, we can try to move a slider. If we decide, for example, to tax coal, we can see the effect, the outcomes of this decision. For example, the decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. But we can see also the primary energy types, the coal primary energy demand decreases, because there is the relationship with if the cost increases, the demand decreases. But we can also explore the natural gas primary energy demand that increases, because the two sectors, coal and natural gas, are related together because they are used especially for the production of electricity. So they are in competition with each other. If we don't want to, we can also explore an impact, a co-benefit from the decrease of coal production, of coal use. And we see that air pollution from energy, the PM 2.5 particulate decrease, so health increases, and also sanitary cost decreases. If we don't want to decide for a decreasing on the slider, we can also open up the detailed settings of En-ROADS of the different sectors. So En-ROADS allows us also to keep a deeper understanding of each sector. We can decide, for example, not to tax directly coal, but not to allow any new coal infrastructure or new coal plant. Or we decide to retire accelerate the coal plant retirement, for example. So it's very complex. It's not easy to use, but we can explore some many different sectors. Okay, and how can we use En-ROADS? So it can use to one after the other, we can compare the outcomes of the solution in different sectors. For example, we can compare the decreasing in coal with a carbon price, for example, or we can build another different climate future, adding up solution one after the other. So there are, I think, En-ROADS is a very powerful tool for this discussion. It helps people understand which are the policies that are high leverage and which ones are low leverage or have important delays. It is, of course, clear that we have to choose among many different solutions, but with En-ROADS we can explore which one could be the best one also in the short times. Some other characteristic of En-ROADS: it is free, it is online, it doesn't need an account, it's an open system. For example, in the assumptions, if we don't agree with the data that En-ROADS uses as its base, we can change. For example, if we don't agree that climate sensitivity is 3.0 degrees centigrade, we can change, and there are many others. It's an open. It's also transparent. It's not a black box. In all the mathematical relationships are written in the technical reference guide. And for the school, for example, we are all teachers. We can use it in a discussion or in a lesson, for example, about a special sector. For example, I don't know, the energy sector, or the sector more related to methane and livestock and agriculture and waste and so on. Or we can also use it with a workshop. Climate Interactive has prepared and written instruction for many activities that we can lead in the class. So, for example, a workshop or a very interesting game that is the climate action simulation, that is a role game in which the participants take the role of delegates of governments and companies and try to all together in a United Nations conference, try to find a solution to the climate crisis. There is also an En-ROADS students assignment, and Climate Interactive is a no-profit organization that helps in many ways teachers to use, to understand how En-ROADS functions, and to help increasing the use at school for an open discussion about climate change. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Really looking forward to trying that out, and looking forward to seeing more about it next year. So there's just a couple of last wee things to say. Good, thank you, Daniela. She's put in the feedback link in the chat, so that's really important. Everybody, please click on that and fill that in. And the last thing to say is that the next session in this series is on Tuesday, the 16th of December at 5 o'clock. And Dr. James Miller from Kingston University in London will be delivering a webinar on social media and climate. Apart from that, thank you all very much, and have a Have a good rest of your evening and a good weekend.